Hi, Misha here, and we're going to do another Star Wars Black Series 6-inch video. I know it's not everyone's cup of tea, but, especially with ones from the original trilogy, the real one, and the prequels, they had good ideas and good designs one. It's time to talk about Separatist battle droids, because we finally have pretty much all of them. And the last two really all came at once in May of 2024. So we're going to talk about not all the versions of the standard B1 battle droid, but 3 of them I happen to have. And then the B2 super battle droid. And finally, the Droideka, which is also known as the destroyer droid. So kind of light infantry, heavy infantry, and basically mobile turret infantry. And if you like this, we can also look at the starfighters, vehicles. The whole system is interesting. I don't know. I think it's aged pretty well, all things considered. I mostly focus on clones and troopers when I do these videos, but droids are pretty cool too. Actually, the B1 was one of the first Black Series I ever bought. I think it was this one. But yeah, we'll just dive on in. The B1 battle droid, originally, at least on paper, a security droid. This was considered a Class 4 droid, meaning that it had relatively limited intelligence and rather single-minded programming. In the Star Wars universe, there are 5 main classes, with one being virtually human, like R2 is Class 2, and Class 3 tended to be a little more specialist, Class 4, battle droids, and the like, and Class 5 basically were just, computers. So, yeah. And here he is and his guys when we meet him in Phantom Menace, but their use by the corporate sector actually goes back. But before we get to that, basic specs on this job. Again, he folds up. Remember, I've actually never seen how these fold, so I kind of did best guess. I do know that the legs fold together because they actually notch. They have little notches in them. You unfold the arms, and when people say the arms kind of cross, so not 100% sure. Did my best guess. But either way, they fold up for storage, and when they don't have enough power and the like. It's kind of neat on this. The leg does have a thing that pops it together. They're very tall and very spindly, I would say in the real world, but yeah, keep in mind that these were purely CGI. So trying to render them in any kind of form is not the easiest. So they're over 1.9 meters tall, so over 6 feet. And they weigh about 65 kilograms. So, they have some mass to them, but they're not the biggest. They are stronger than they look, though. They're capable of basic hand-to-hand fighting, and they were designed from the outset to handle human weapons, even though they only have 3-digit hands. And most of the sensors and stuff are in the head, including these fold-out little, essentially ears, although they're sensors. And they often have a comm type of backpack with extra energy antenna, and they can stow their E5 blaster, which is, their standard. We'll get to that in a bit. It's essentially a copy of a BlazTech made cheaply and whatnot, and that's the whole point. These were lightweight, cheap, and they started off around 40 BBY when the corporate sector successfully lobbied the Republic Senate to have automated security to protect against pirates and theft and what have you. and it would grow from there. That would allow the Trade Federation and the Techno Union to design and purchase droids, and these were designed by Bactoid on Geonosis, and they generally mimic the look of a Geonosian. They have very basic armor plating, most of their processors and their head. The positive to that is they can still have some functionality even with the head detached, but the thing is, if you destroy the head, it's out. Their limbs have limited flexibility and are held together with electromagnetism. To be fair, the Clone Trooper armor and Stormtrooper armor use part of this to link the plates together too, but at least they had an undersuit. But yeah, they were just cheap. And in the beginning, when we meet them in 32 BBY, the invasion of Naboo, they were controlled by a central ship. Otherwise, they didn't have a whole lot of autonomy. But the reason for it was really to coordinate such a large army. That was the largest droid army that had been assembled and used at the time, and to get them all on the same page, they needed a central control. This would change later on, and obviously that invasion was not exactly 100% successful. But, well, they did at least successfully occupy for a time, and much more cost-effective than human mercenaries or alien soldiers or anything else, and they were loyal, at least to a sense. They did tend to just attack in ranks and waves. They didn't seem to really understand the whole concept of cover. So there's that. And there were several specialized variants. So let's switch out our droids. If memory serves, this is the Geonosian paint scheme, where it's kind of a gray-red. They came in a few different armor colors and plates. And he doesn't have the backpack. He's got the kind of smaller, which is sort of like a command antenna. Still carries the standard E5. They could use other weapons, including the SE-14 blaster pistol, and even hand-to-hand blades and pikes, but this was the most common weapon. The OOM series was kind of a command series that actually even technically predates the B1, although essentially it is a B1, or rather a B1 is kind of a dumbed-down OOM series. They were command and security droids, and you saw them leading quite often. You also saw some with specialized programming to drive vehicles like the AAT tank or the MTT transport, and they could even be pilots, although most of the Separatist vehicles were automated themselves with droid brains. If a pilot was needed, they could fly most craft because they were essentially human-sized. And of course, after Naboo, the control ship was destroyed by Darth Vader. Now, he was a kid. They like to claim Anakin. I think he was still Darth Vader even back then. R2 knew what was up. The Republic quickly passed rules and regulations against production, at least purchasing by the Trade Federation for the droids. But this really just forced them to go to the Outer Rim, out of direct Republic control, and keep on their things. I mean, the Republic couldn't really say much. They were building a clone army in secret. I want to be honest, between using droids is cannon fodder and using living cloned human beings, I kind of think the CIS was more on the moral high ground there. Dude, just saying. But yeah, after Naboo and before Geonosis here, they actually would just continue to improve the droids, their programming, introducing more variants. It's still the basic B1, but they still want to just cheap cannon fodder. But they did see some marked improvements, and of course at the Battle of Geonosis, this was their main droid. but not their only one. And we saw at that battle that they were now autonomous, at least so far as they could be. And that was actually thanks to the next droid, and thanks to the Techno Union, the Techno Federation. We'll see if this guy goes falling during the video. Chances are yes. And ironically, this guy is a little bit shorter, depending on how extended the B1 is. But yeah, the B2 Super Battle Droid. This was not available for Naboo. And we first see these in Attack of the Clones. Actually, technically they first revealed in Jedi Starfighter, which came out right before Attack of the Clones, but that's semantics. And as a new model, it was designed after Naboo, when the flaw of having a control ship was revealed. They really needed something that could operate, at least on a certain level, autonomously all the time, even in large groups. And so this is where the Techno Union really put its knowledge to work and made a droid brain capable of operating a combat droid and still working in a unit. And it started here. Now, its autonomous brain technology would soon get transplanted to the B1, making a new generation that was used at Geonosis and throughout the Clone Wars. But really, it was a takeoff of the B2, and that was because of the Techno Union. And this is kind of early cooperation. Obviously the need came from the Trade Federation, and the technology came from the Techno Union. And we saw a limited run done by Bactoid themselves. And once this first batch was successfully tested, and they had the evidence to show it worked, this gave Count Dooku the wherewithal to approach Poggle the Lesser of Geonosis and convince him to put all of the Geonosian facilities at the disposal to manufacture the new B2. So it was all three, Techno Union, Trade Federation, and Geonosis, that went together to make these guys. And so by the time of Geonosis and 22 BBY, we had a full production batch underway, although they really hadn't seen full-scale combat yet. And so Geonosis would be their initial testing ground. So aside from being, obviously thicker and bulkier than the B1, how do they differ? So I talked about the processor and all that. It is protected. It's actually buried quite deep. The head, as it were, is part of the body, and it's actually deep in the chest. And this has a much heavier, thicker armor plating. It even has lightsaber-resistant metal involved in the alloy. Not that it could take a direct hit, but, it could glancing blows, and it could take a few, and it could take quite a few blaster bolts. So that was good. And the processor itself was well buried. And this one from the Black Series, you can see, if I can get it here, pop off the head, as it were, to reveal the sensor unit. And for more, you can pop off that was not the droid, that was my shoulder. Getting old, guys, what do you do? Yeah, you're getting old when you go to take apart a figure and you make more noise than it does. But yeah, this chest plate comes off, and you can see the inner workings and where the processor and all that would be. Kind of neat. Gives it some verisimilitude. And it has pretty good articulation, at least for what you'd expect. These guys weren't exactly known for super flexibility. That was more the B1. The B1s are still known for being rather clumsy. And you'll notice he doesn't have a blaster in his hands. That's because they were designed for built-in right here on the arm. I always think it looks better if you rotate the hand down a bit. You've got a dual auto blaster there. And it can be replaced with other things. In fact, a second one can even be added on the left hand if needed. or something else. Sometimes they have a couple of wrist rockets or other things there. And the hands, in theory, can use human alien weapons, but their clamps are pretty big. So they really prefer and work best with weapons that can be directly controlled from the brain without needing to manipulate triggers and whatnot. Pretty neat figure that just came out. Typically these have a kind of gray silver plating, although they can be spray painted for camo duty. And they did well at the first battle of Geonosis, even though it didn't exactly end up best for the CIS. The B2s themselves proved that they were much tougher. They had more aggressive programming than the B1s. And they were more accurate. Now, the B1s were known for being quite inaccurate, but the B2s are better, especially with their built-in cannon, but still not great. But again, they're droids. They were never able to produce a ton of these. They only built one B2 for about every 100 B1s. Part of it was just cost. But they were very much in demand. A lot of the CIS officers wanted these in their ranks. They were used really well for, door guards, scouts, shock troops. They were pretty aggressive on the battlefield, more than the B1s. And they really could just hang in a fight longer. But they were not without their faults. Since they essentially were built with a first-generation independent processor, sometimes they actually appeared dumber than the B1s. Of course, part of it was, too, they were more aggressive, so it could just be that they were more reckless. And because of their hands, they weren't always able to manipulate fine things. Their motor skills were, not all the greatest, so they couldn't do more hacking-type jobs. And they had limited kind of processor memory, and in fact, they were often criticized for not having enough processor or memory in them, and so they really needed to be supervised and directed by a commando droid, a tactical droid of some type. They weren't really good at it being independent. In fact, they did have a nasty tendency to even forget about a target they were attacking if it went out of their kind of line of sight. Trying to kind of rotate this and get it up. They tended to stow their arm up when they weren't shooting their little blaster wrists. There, I got it. And of course, because they were so top heavy, they needed some kind of stabilization, typically gyroscopes. On the other hand, they did have magnetic feet and kind of grippy feet for terrain stability. And, they had some weight to them. They might have been considered lighter than you would think. Yeah. But yeah, these were the heavy attack infantry. They were used at Christophsis. They were used Second Battle of Geonosis. They were very prominent during the Outer Rim sieges. And they were there at the Battle of Coruscant in 19 BBY. Of course, alongside all the other members. I mentioned the E5. There are two different versions we get from the Black Series. This is a little more compact. This is the bulkier version. These were designed and produced at Bactoid, but they were kind of a ripoff of a Blastech design. They're considered a medium weight, medium profile. They're about 2¼ kilograms, so about 5 pounds. And they actually hold quite a bit of energy, 500 shots, and the shots are considered quite powerful. The downside is they're known for not being the most accurate, and then they're in the hands of droids that also aren't the most accurate, so, that. And they're known for overheating, at least producing a lot of heat to the user's hand, so not a lot of insulation, which is uncomfortable to an organic, but not to a droid. And, they were cheap enough, so This was the standard for the CIS, but it wasn't the only weapon the droid army used. Just the main one. Here we have another B1. I believe this is the one from the game. If not, I mixed up the Geonosian in it, but oh well, you get the idea. This is the, if I picked up the right one, because the difference is in the paint scheme, this is the heavy battle droid. He actually comes with 3 different weapons, the backpack. One of them's a standard E5, but then we have this large cannon, which I believe is supposed to be a radiation cannon. That's one of the weapons they used. They also could use grenades, or again, bladed weapons for hand-to-hand. So even though they were relatively light-framed and all that, they could carry some pretty beefy weapons. And as I said earlier, they could have their programming updated for more tactical roles. And again, the BX Commando was just a heavily modified B1 with more or less a different head, and they were actually quite capable. And the OOM series, the series, still remain kind of a major tactical droid. That's why I said in some ways they were maybe more intelligent than the B2s. And it seems like the longer a droid was online and active without having a memory wipe, they got a little quirky, but they could get more intelligent and more intuitive too. So some of the B1s were simply older, but not all, because clones, even though the B1s very much outnumbered the clone troopers, because they were produced in the billions, clones were considered, one clone was worth 20 battle droids, or one clone was worth 50 if he was a veteran. But I still think the whole, organics versus that, maybe not the most honest thing in the world. They're neat. He does, even the figure does have some pretty good hands for holding things. Better than you would think, honestly. And there's, quite a bit of fun you can have with these and posing them and folding them up and stuff. But yeah, several specialized versions of the B1. We had the B2 Super. And then, of course, we have the final one. And it actually came from a different design bureau. In fact, a different species entirely. Which kind of explains a thing or two about why it's so different. We come at last to the Droideka. I think this is the most recent release in the Black Series too, and it's considered a deluxe for kind of obvious reasons. And we first encounter these in the Phantom Menace, and whereas the B series were made by Bactoid and Geonosis, this was made by the Colicoids of Cala 4. And it was another one that really got going after 40 BBY. They were designed as security droids, but were extremely expensive. The Trade Federation only was able to acquire so many, one, because they purchased a somewhat cheaper model that would be slave to a central processing computer, and two, because they literally traded flesh. Yeah, the Colicoids were insects that were carnivorous. So that happened. Yeah, so pretty expensive. They were considered quite good, but very costly droids. And very unconventional and non-human. Now this is, of course, the ball mode, or at least the best I can guess. Not being able to see photos, I just kind of winged it, quite literally. And in this mode, it was good for transport, and also getting around the battlefield quite quickly. In fact, it could go up to about 75 kph, so over 40 miles an hour. Not bad for transport. But its weapons were not deployable, nor its defenses. So yeah, it was just this. These could be quickly dispensed in this form with Droideka dispensers, essentially chutes. And the name, of course, kind Comes from the calicoid species and basically just means droid, drone. And it's definitely not said weird at all in Phantom Menace, but this appears in all 3 films. But I believe this version is supposed to be from the Phantom Menace, because this year is the 25th anniversary. So, yeah, let me deploy this guy out, and we'll talk about its features, strengths, limitations, so on and so forth, and what it did in the CIS Army. And there it is, at least somewhat. There are a lot of pivot points in this guy, and quite a bit of ways to position him, and ratchets, and pretty interesting. But yeah, deployed, in a way, this kind of becomes a mobile turret. For offense, we have 2 dual cannon on these pretty articulated gun arms. Each one is equivalent to a Z6, which is a relatively heavy blaster cannon. So, in effect, he has 4 machine guns, at least the Star Wars equivalent, meaning he can really lay down some power. Now, these can be replaced with ion cannons, and there's even a version that has a blade for close-in defense if needed. You'll notice the hoses for power. You actually see that on the Z6 as well. So they do require quite a bit of power. And part of the reason for separation too is heat. Rapid firing would definitely do that. And these are designed for long to medium range engagements. And for defense, he does have Bronzian armor, as it's called. But more importantly, he has a mobile shield generator. That's what these 2 flaps on each side of the bottom armor, but they're shield emitters. Now, it cannot deploy these in ball mode. It has to be in its standard tripod mode. Hang on a second. His little neck is flexed. This bottom joint here has some kind of ratcheting features. There we go. Put it back. There's several places it can kind of click in, so you can put it in several angles. And of course, I mean, yeah, this is all articulated, all the legs, head, and all that. In fact, you've got a stock that the head's on. You can slide it back or up, or yeah, quite a bit of stuff. So if I don't have him deployed the way you like to see your Droidekas, that's okay. You probably can. Head's kind of neat because this actually retracts in and rotates and can be removed, and yeah. So he's got a shield generator on armor, and because of the cannon and the shield itself, he actually has a small starfighter class fusion reactor in this bulb. And below that, he actually has a small repulsor on the bottom to make walking easier. He mostly uses his tripod legs to walk a little slow, so he uses a repulsor to kind of give a little boost, a little spring to his step. Much like a Dalek, he doesn't really have a great time with stairs, at least not in foot mode and tripod mode. In ball mode, I'm sure he can go downstairs really good. I had a hamster once when I was a kid, and remember the old hamster balls? Yeah, we had stairs in our house, and the hamster decided it might be fun to go towards that. So I heard dunk, 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 because it was tile and brick. The hamster is okay, no worries, but it was kind of funny, and we just kind of looked at each other. Yeah, that's kind of why they're so expensive and powerful. The sensors on the head are not traditional photoreceptors. Again, the colicoids were insectoid. So it actually has a type of heat vision, IR vision, and the sensors are on these stalks. But that's that. They do have pretty good intelligence, at least more than a lot of battle droids. Probably a little smarter than a B2, but they were a little more single-minded, and they were aggressive like B2s. But again, the problem and that was cost. These were very, very expensive, more than a starfighter. The Trade Federation was only able to get so many because they had a special meat provider rate. But yeah, these are deployed at Naboo, and we continue to see deployment. They were at Geonosis, but they deployed in relatively small numbers, not because they didn't have that many, they actually did, but because they were mostly in storage at the time. But the ones that were there did do pretty well. That's probably the best way to deploy the guns, because there's a lot of weight to them. And these are articulated, but they also have ratchets, so you can place them up or down. There's a lot of weight to this, which is ironic because the actual droid itself was shockingly light. Only said to be about 75, 80 kilograms, which I'm not sure is true, but if we're saying they're using space-age armor, sure, why not? They are actually technically a little bit shorter than a B1, only because of how tall and lanky those are. So, in addition to cost, there were some downsides. These were very deadly, but clones and Jedi did find some weak points. And one of them was the shield itself. Because the generators were towards the bottom, at the top, if you could get up there, where the two projectors kind of intersected, you could break through. Now, that was something a clone would probably not be able to exploit too often, more of a Jedi thing. But the weak spot was up here. Keep in mind, even though this is the head, that's more of the sensor head. The actual processors are kind of buried in there. Another thing with the shield, it was good. It could intercept blaster bolts and even slug thrower bolts. It was set to the walking speed of the Droideka. So anything moving slower than how fast this could walk on its three little legs could potentially penetrate the shield. So you could either, landmines were good, or if you slowly roll the thermal detonator, that could get through, or even better, an EMP, which the clones would kind of learn. It was still tricky, but it was at least possible. Another somewhat interesting weakness, the guns. Again, like I said earlier, they were kind of long, medium range. The problem is they're kind of far apart, so close in, there would be some small gaps in coverage. Now, getting close in, that's the trick, but if you could get in the middle here, or get in close, it would have a harder time hitting you. Its software was really meant for longer ranges, and its physical configuration wasn't really designed for fighting close in. So it would kind of need closer support like some B1s. And another problem, the rear. This is truly a blind spot. One, it doesn't really have much sensor ability back here. And two, its weapons really can't easily be traversed back here. So if someone could get down behind them, then they could potentially hit it. Of course, they still have to deal with the shield, one way or the other, which was a very powerful shield. It could actually take a light artillery strike, any kind of handheld blaster. It wasn't penetrating it anytime soon. So I guess it was a good thing for the Grand Army of the Republic that these were so super expensive. You could build 200 B1 battle droids for the cost of one Droideka, and that's at the we're giving us meat discount rate. So they were good. They had some weak points. Yeah, it was mostly the cost. Now they did get these a little better throughout the Clone Wars. Destroyer droids were made in 3 main series for the Clone Wars and before. When we see them in Phantom Menace, this is the P series. It could either be the earlier one or just the kind of cheaper one the Trade Federation bought for peacetime. They were the ones that were centrally controlled, and while they did have a fusion reactor, it was kind of the lower output version. When we see them on Geonosis, that was the W series. They had independent control, which again seems like was always an option from the Calicoids, just not always purchased because of extra cost. So different processors than the B2s and later B1s would have. And that while they did have the ability to use shielding, they had most of their energy focused on their weaponry. They just didn't have quite enough energy to power both their improved weapons, more powerful weapons, and their shielding, so yeah. The final series, seen late in the Clone Wars, was the Q series, and it had enough juice in the updated, uprated reactor for the shields and the guns, which is always a good thing. And that was the Droidekas. Of course, this was the most devastating and devious battle droid that the Separatists had during the Clone Wars. Yeah. So the B1s were the backbone, and the ones made, by and large, the most, and honestly the most versatile and flexible. And the Droidekas, the destroyers, they were the heavy hitters, not the fastest movers when deployed, and couldn't really do much when rolling, but they were good for what they were. They were almost a small tank in and of themselves. And the B2s kind of split the difference, although one might argue they were maybe the most dim-witted or most inflexible. And they were made in between. Like I said, for every one B1, we had about for every 100 B1s, we had about one B2, and Droidkas were definitely not made anymore, and about 2 to 250 per B1, even during the Clone Wars. And the B1s and B2s weren't just made on Geonosis, although that was the largest droid factory. It was destroyed around 21 BBY, though. But they were pretty much just scattered throughout the Outer Rim and part of the Outer Rim Caesars. And of course, all the droids were ordered shut down after Darth Vader very successfully and very patiently negotiated a surrender with the Separatist leader, and everyone went home and happy. Now, of course, that would leave millions, if not billions, of leftover B1s in the galaxy, and some would be reactivated by pirates illegally, maybe a handful used legally by security, planetary defense, but honestly, stormtroopers had a shoot-on-sight order, and the same would go for the B2s, but there were very few B2s left after the Clone Wars, at least relatively speaking. So they too were shoot-on-sight and became quite rare. But the Droidekas had a different fate. The Empire actually saw the use in these, and so they repurposed, reprogrammed, and reactivated some, and they would use these to defend kind of installations on the Outer Rim where personnel were at a premium, droids weren't, or to defend Imperial installations that were meant to be secret, like, Sith outposts that Palpatine didn't really want people knowing were there. Droids could keep a secret. Well, maybe B1s couldn't, but Droidekas, who didn't really say much, definitely could. So these actually were in Imperial service for a while. And of course, as the years go by, a few B1s and B2s would pop up, even in rebellion hands, but not really. I still argue that it was more ethical to employ automatons like droids than it would be living humans like clones, but, your mileage may vary. So, yeah, the Clone Wars, droids. They made a lot of them, used up a lot of metal. Well, there you have it. I feel like we've got a really good lineup of the ground forces. It would be cool to have a BX commando droid, although they're very similar to the standard B1. You could probably kit bash one together. And of course, there are others like the Magna Guard, which I considered putting in the video, but I kind of figured that was better for like an assassin droid video. So I wanted to try to focus on just the frontline combat droids facing clones. And I've done quite a few videos looking at clones in the past. And I really do think this is among the best work in the Black Series. They seem like they do better when they're doing aliens and droids. Their human figures are usually best when they're in full suits. Basically, the more clothing, the better. Keep in mind that my point of view is from someone who grew up with the 3 3/4 figures, which, were very charming for the time. In fact, we thought they were pretty high detail. And for, the early 80s, they were. But technology, time has moved on. Anyway, while I was not a child when the prequels came out, I was a young adult, and then mid-20s, and then, good God, approaching 30. Anyway, that's terrifying. When the prequels came out, yeah, it still holds a cool place for me. I remember hanging out with friends, getting tickets for Phantom Menace. I remember definitely not sailing the high seas and getting a copy of Attack of the Clones early. And I actually saw the Revenge of the Sith with my entire family because they all like Star Wars too. So for the final one, back in 05, we made a family day out of it. I think that's the only one I actually saw in theater with my family, though. So that was pretty cool. Good memories, and the droids were there. Which is your favorite? I'm curious. The classic B1, hard to beat. But I think I like the B2 because it reminds me of like a mech. Anyway, guys, appreciate you hanging out. Sorry I haven't done a lot of videos on this channel recently. I've just been busy with other YouTube things and, frankly, life things. And also we had some weather come through. Life happening. But I'm sure sooner or later it'll slow down. This is Misha. Catch you very soon.